It's safe to say that America has Roman roots, and we need to find out how deeply ancient Rome influenced the foundations of this nation. The framers of the Constitution incorporated Roman ideas and drew upon the Roman model when forming the nation. The civil law structure and many of the symbols of the United States government also have their origins in ancient Rome. Why? This is the continuation of our discussion about the fourth beast in the book of Daniel. It was the Roman Empire, the legs of iron and the feet made of iron and clay. There are good reasons to examine Roman history to see where the United States is headed. We can clearly see that America and other Western nations are in decline, but many fail to ask why or to look for the connection to the Roman Empire. So it's time to take a look at America's Roman roots. Now let's go back to a passage I shared previously. This comes from Deuteronomy 32, 7 through 9, and I'm going to read it from the Septuagint. It says, "Remember the days of old. Consider the years for past ages. Ask thy father, and he shall relate to thee, thine elders, and they shall tell thee. When the Most High divided the nations, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the nations according to the number of the angels of Yah, and his people, Jacob, became the portion of the Most High. Israel was the line of his inheritance." So at the end of the day, Europeans made Christianity conform to their old pagan religion. Why do I say that? Because it points back to the Romans. But the head of gold representing Gentile rule is Babylon. The Gentile empires didn't turn away from their pagan roots. They continued worshiping the fallen angels and the children born to them. And in this session, you're going to see how true that is. And now we're going to look at how the founders incorporated their pagan ideologies into the framework of America. Some of you may be familiar with this image. It's called the Apotheosis of Washington. It's the fresco painted by Greek-Italian artist Constantino Brumidi in 1865. You'll see this on the ceiling of the dome in the rotunda of the United States Capitol. Now, with it being so high up, some of the details cannot be seen, but the truth about this nation is hidden in the details. It's important for us to have a good understanding of the meaning of the word apotheosis. So it comes from Cambridge Dictionary. It says apotheosis is the act of making someone a god. Let that sink in. And this is a common practice in pagan religions, you all. So when it says the apotheosis of Washington, they are talking about the act of making George Washington a god. They give examples here referencing the apotheosis of Emperor Trajan, Saint Francis, and how the Romans recognized only the apotheosis of Romulus. So let's take a look at this image. This is the fresco painting that's in the dome of the Capitol, commemorating the end of the Civil War. And it's actually summarizing the history of the nation as well. What's interesting is that the artist, Brumidi, presents George Washington as a god. So let's take a closer look at what is hidden in plain sight. Let's take a look at this fresco. It depicts George Washington in the middle with female figures on his left and right. The one on his left represents liberty, also known as Lady Liberty or Libertas. The other on his right is victory, and they're ascending into the heavens. He's wearing a presidential suit that's draped in a purple fabric. This connects the president to Roman generals who wore purple cloaks when they returned victorious from battle. You see a rainbow at his feet. This is also symbolic of peace and victory. So Lady Liberty is wearing a Phrygian red cap on her head. This is an ancient Roman symbol of freedom. So we see here that the artist created an elaborate fresco with iconography connecting the United States and George Washington to ancient Greece and Rome. There's a whole lot more to see here, so let's go on. Let's look at worldhistory.edu to get some more information on Lady Liberty. It says Libertas was the Roman goddess of liberty and freedom. She was often depicted as a woman wearing a Phrygian cap, which is a symbol of emancipation and freedom, and carrying a rod or scepter. In some depictions, she was also shown holding a pilus, which was a type of hat worn by slaves when they were granted their freedom. Libertas was associated with the concept of libertas publica, which referred to the freedom of the Roman people as a whole, rather than individual liberty. She was also associated with the goddess Fortuna, who represented good fortune and luck. It says in ancient Roman culture, it was common to personify important virtues such as generosity, liberty, and piety in a feminine form. The Latin word for liberty is libertas. It was derived from the name of the Roman goddess Libertas, known as Eleutheria in Greek mythology. This goddess was often depicted on coins and other artifacts, including an Arius of Roman Emperor Galba. Now let's go back to the fresco, and you see sitting next to him on the right is Victoria, the one holding the trumpet. So let's get some additional information about her. It says in Greek mythology, the goddess Nike had a very important place in the society. She was typically associated with speed, strength, and victory. Due to this, soldiers and military generals never went out to battle without offering some sort of prayers or sacrifice to the goddess. Nike was not just associated with the army. She was the goddess that ancient Greeks from all walks of life called upon when facing a struggle. It is believed that she acted as the mediator between the gods and men. During the Roman era, the goddess Nike's equivalent was the goddess Victoria. So they kept changing the names, but it's the same pagan deity. What else do we see here? Well, in the center, you see the woman with the sword and the flowing red cape. Who is she? This scene is supposed to represent war, with Lady Freedom wearing a red cape and a helmet. She's carrying a shield that's reminiscent of those on the Statue of Freedom, and a sword. She also is supposed to be trampling tyranny and kingly power. She's assisted by an eagle that's carrying arrows and a thunderbolt. Now, as we look at this scene of Washington ascending into the heavens, you would think that there would be some type of reference to scripture, but no, it's not there. But you see him surrounded by pagan deities. In Ephesians, we're told that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness. And where is it? It's in high places. In other words, the heavenly realm. This scene is symbolic, and it's a nod to the fallen angels, those they call the sky gods. Now, you need to understand that they were sending a message, And sometimes we're looking at things without understanding what it's saying. So we need to understand that paintings can also be symbolic. It's imagery. It's an expression. The symbols and paintings tell a story. I want to share some excerpts from this article entitled Occult Symbols You See Every Day Without Realizing It. It says, throughout history, symbols have carried powerful meanings across cultures. People use symbols for protection, knowledge, or control, imbuing simple shapes with mystical energy. Occult symbols in particular come from secret traditions meant to convey spiritual ideas or divine truths. Even today, these symbols continue to impact us, whether we notice them or not. So one of the first symbols we should all know about is the all-seeing eye. It says the all-seeing eye, also known as the eye of providence, represents divine sight or hidden knowledge. Its roots stretch back to ancient Egypt, where the eye of Horus symbolized protection and health. In Freemasonry, the all-seeing eye evolved into a representation of God or divine awareness, often used to signify the watchful presence of higher powers. It says today you can find the all-seeing eye embedded in logos, media, and government symbols. Look closely at a US dollar bill and you'll see the eye perched above a pyramid, hinting at control through hidden knowledge. Corporations such as CBS also use the eye symbol in their branding, subtly signaling observation and insight. Whether it's meant to convey enlightenment or surveillance, the symbol communicates a presence that's both powerful and mysterious. Another one is the Ouroboros. That's the snake that eats itself. The Ouroboros, a serpent or dragon devouring its own tail, has symbolized cycles of life, death, and rebirth for millennia. It first appeared in Egyptian and Greek traditions, then later in alchemical texts representing eternity and the continuous process of change. And again, these things are right in front of us, but we didn't know what we were looking at. But it's right there. The evidence is in plain sight. I'm sure that you've seen a lot of these. Well, now you know what's really behind it. So yes, symbols and paintings matter. And we can also say that about names. We see Roman gods in the Capitol building. And we need to know that that was not a coincidence. The founders wanted to tie the nation's history to Rome. So I'm going to share some information from this article written by Gary Fisher entitled Capital, Capital, and the Ancient City: The Influence of Roman Urban and Architectural Models on the Design of the Capitol Building in Washington, D.C. He begins by saying that in the text, Architecture, Power, and National Identity, Lawrence Vail demonstrated the extent to which government buildings serve as a symbol of the state, and how we can learn much about a political regime by observing closely what it builds. And this is the point I've been making throughout this series. We can look at the signs, the symbols, and behavior to identify the people associated with the beast from Daniel's vision. The evidence is right in front of us. The author says visitors to Washington, D.C. cannot fail to notice the classical aesthetics that's rampant in the city. It says Washington possesses the highest concentration of public buildings adorned with pediments of any city in Europe or North America, prompting Irish poet Thomas Moore to refer to the city as this modern Rome in 1804. Modern Rome? Why would he equate Washington, D.C. with Rome? It's because we're talking about one of the nations birthed out of the legs of iron and feet mixed with iron and clay. It goes on to say that little work has been done to understand the process by which Washington, D.C. came to resemble ancient models, or the extent to which this seemingly ancient appearance represents the product of a concerted effort on the part of its designers to directly emulate ancient examples. So in essence, they planned the layout of the city after the model of Rome on purpose, and we need to know why. It goes on to say this internalization of ancient design into American architecture after the Revolution is demonstrated most effectively by the contrast between state buildings in colonial and federal Virginia, namely between the colonial governor's palace in Williamsburg and the federal state capitol in Richmond. It was designed by Thomas Jefferson and modeled on the Roman Maison-Curie in Nimes, France. The author says the latter is fundamentally a Roman temple in all aspects of its structure and design. Other buildings that represent a similarly fundamental structure include the University of Virginia, the Bank of Pennsylvania, and the Baltimore Cathedral. He says the extent to which American founders went to make their capital city resemble ancient models has been largely ignored by present scholarship. It goes on to say that the decision to name the legislative house the Capitol thus represents a major break from the established naming tradition within America. Naming it the Capitol can only have been understood as an evocation of either contemporary ideas of the Senate in Republican Rome or, at the very least, the Virginia Capitol in Richmond, which, as has been discussed, was a near identical imitation of the Roman Maison-Curie in Nimes. The effect of both of these possibilities would have been a very conscious allusion to the ancient world. The notion that the actual design of the Capitol building is based on ancient models is one that at first seems to have a lot of credence. Even to the casual observer, the design of the building with its circular rotunda, vaulted ceilings, pedimented portico, and Corinthian columns seems classically inspired. Various commentators have discussed how the building is based upon the Roman models, in particular the Pantheon. It goes on to say that the adherence to ancient principles of architecture represented a significant desire of the Capitol's designers, particularly Jefferson, is demonstrated further by the controversy over the manner in which the chamber of the House of Representatives was to be lit. Latrobe, who was the architect at the time, suggested that for practical reasons a modern lantern design be used to light the chamber, but Jefferson responded to the suggestion by saying, "You know my reverence for the Grecian and Roman style of architecture. I do not recollect ever to have seen in their buildings a single instance of a lantern, cupola, or belfry, even going so far as to call them one of the degeneracies of modern architecture." It says, "The fervency with which the designers of the Capitol pursued the adherence to ancient models is clear." So we have several references here regarding how determined Jefferson and others were to maintain a Romanesque look for the nation's Capitol buildings, so much so that Thomas More referred to the city as modern Rome. Were there others who believed that way? Let's do some digging. I'm going to share some excerpts from this book written by William Tyndall, and it's entitled Standard History of the City of Washington, from a study of the original sources. This was published in 1914. We'll begin reading here where it says, "We do not read of other white settlers visiting the site of the District of Columbia until the close of the 17th century, when a company of Irish and Scotch came over and started a colony in Maryland, within the present lines or limits of the district. Of the land ceded to these settlers, 3 tracts lay within the boundaries of the city of Washington. These refugees seem to have been good managers and to have succeeded accordingly. They called their new home New Scotland, and worked their farms in peace and quiet, little dreaming that land where their produce grew would one day be the territory of one of the proudest cities of one of the greatest nations of Earth's history." It goes on to say one of these early proprietors, Robert Troup, called his farm Scotland Yard, and it comprised what is now southeast Washington. Another, Francis Pope, named his place Rome, and called a small stream at the foot of his hill Tiber River. It is told of this dreamer that he predicted a greater capital than Rome would occupy that hill, and that later generations would command a great and flourishing country in the New World. He related that he had had a dream or vision in which he had seen a splendid Parliament House on the hill, now known to us as Capitol Hill, which he purchased and called Rome, in prophetic honor of the great city to be. This says his title to the land may be somewhat convincing of his prophecy, as it was deeded under the name Rome on June 5, 1663. It reads, "Laid out for Francis Pope, of this province, gentleman, a parcel of land in Charles County called Rome, lying on the east side of the Anacostia River, beginning at a marked oak, standing by the riverside, the bounded tree of Captain Robert Troup, and running north by the river for breadth, the length 200 perches, to a bounded oak, standing at the mouth of a bay or inlet called Tiber." It says, "His furrows have long since given place to streets and buildings. His stream still flows in the old course, less glorious perhaps, though more useful, as it now serves the modern use of a city sewer." It says some of the descendants of those early Scotch and Irish farmers were among the first proprietors of the city of Washington, and many of their descendants have continued to help build the capital and the country to the present day. Let's see if we can corroborate any of this. We have a newspaper article that came out of the local newspaper called Washington Rambles on October 7th, 1883. Now the print is a bit small, so I enlarged the text on the right to read the portion specific to the property owned by Francis Pope. It says 1st June 5, 1663. Tract of land laid out for Francis Pope called Room or Rome. In the description of this tract, the Tiber River is mentioned on the boundary line. I'll drop down because it's hard to make out the next sentence. But it goes on to say these 3 tracts, it is believed, embraced all the land now occupied by the city of Washington. These tracts were subdivided by their owners into smaller portions and sold, devised and inherited again and again. From the date at which the first settlers began their lives here until within a short time before the establishment of the capital, nothing is known of the people, not a line anywhere of their lives, not a tombstone to tell us of the dates of their births and deaths. Now let's bring in another source to confirm the name, and this comes from the Catholic Encyclopedia. It begins talking about a priest called Andrew White. It says he was the apostle of Maryland. He was the first priest to visit the region. In 1639, he established a mission at Kittamagoon, a few miles below Washington, and with solemn ceremony baptized the Emperor of Pocastaway. He also carried the gospel still nearer to Washington. It says the annual letter for 1641 mentions that the king of the Anacostans was a most promising candidate for baptism. The tribe from which the Anacostia River is named dwelt in the immediate neighborhood and on the site of the national capital. So that the history of Catholicism in the district is traced back to the earliest days of Lord Baltimore's colony. It says, as settlements advanced up the country from lower Maryland, a fair proportion of those who acquired land in what is now the district were Catholics. So that brings in the Catholic connection. Now listen, in 1669, a parcel of land called Rome was laid out of Francis Pope, extending to the south of an inlet called Tiber. This gentleman, Pope of Rome on the Tiber, was sheriff of Charles County and in all probability a Catholic. Now how strange is that the man naming the property was named Francis Pope, and then later you have Pope Francis? This also tells us that John Carroll was appointed superior of the American Church, and his consecrations at Lulworth Castle, England, in 1790 to the See of Baltimore coincided with the selection of Washington as the seat of government. It says the District of Columbia has always been included in the Diocese of Baltimore. So this adds another piece to the puzzle. Truth can be a hard pill to swallow, but facts are facts. We're seeing what is at the root of this nation's history, and it all points back to Rome. Look at this image. It represents the apotheosis of Antonius and Faustina from the column base of Antonius in Rome. You see some of the same details from the fresco. So the meaning of apotheosis, let's make sure we understand, is the raising of a human to the status of a god. The concept was known in many ancient traditions, including imperial Rome, where a deceased emperor could be recognized as divine by his successor and the decree of the Senate. So let's go back to the fresco and see if we can find some additional details. This is another scene from the fresco, and it's telling us where the scientific knowledge came from. And they show Minerva. She's teaching Benjamin Franklin, Robert Fulton, and Samuel Morse. Now, is this not pointing back to what's written in the book of Enoch, where it tells us that the fallen began teaching men various things? Well, let's find out about Minerva. We need to know who she is. This comes from World History Encyclopedia, and it tells us that Minerva was the Roman goddess of wisdom, medicine, commerce, handicraft, poetry, the arts in general, and later war. It says in many ways similar to the Greek goddess Athena. She had important temples in Rome and was patron of the Quinquatris festival. Originally, Minerva was an Italian goddess of handicrafts closely associated to the Greek goddess Athena. It says the scholarly consensus, however, is that Minerva was indigenous, passing to the Romans from the Etruscan goddess. Now, it goes on to tell us that she was the daughter of Jupiter and was worshipped in Rome as one of the Capitoline triad, along with Jupiter and Juno. So, what's the message from the fresco? It's telling people where their knowledge came from, and they are still being instructed by those beings today. There's more. This is another panel from the fresco. This represents marine life. Well, who do we have here? An image of Neptune holding his trident and Venus holding the transatlantic cable, which was being laid at the time the fresco was painted. What should we know about Neptune? This comes from Britannica. It's talking about Neptune. He is a Roman god. Neptune, in Roman religion, originally the god of fresh water, by 399 BCE, he was identified with the Greek Poseidon and thus became a deity of the sea. So the trident symbol, it's an iconic emblem rooted supposedly in ancient mythology, but why does it continue to hold significant meaning in American contemporary society? Let's look right here. The United States Navy. Let's look at this article entitled U.S. Navy SEAL Trident, the ultimate symbol of elite warfare. The question is being asked, what is the U.S. Navy SEAL Trident and what does it symbolize? Listen to the response. The U.S. Navy SEAL Trident is a badge worn by qualified members of the United States Navy's Naval Special Warfare Command. This badge consists of a golden eagle with an anchor, trident, and pistol in its talons. The trident in the emblem represents both modern-day sea warfare as well as Neptune, Roman god of water and sea. They're not hiding this, folks. It's right in your face. But when you don't understand what you're looking at, you don't think it's significant. These folks continued worshiping and honoring their pagan deities. Who else did they honor in this fresco? Well, now we see Mercury. This is represented by commerce. He's handing a bag of money to Robert Morris, financier of the American Revolution. What should we know about Mercury? He just so happens to be another Roman god. It says Mercury in Roman religion is god of shopkeepers and merchants, travelers and transporters of goods, and thieves and tricksters. He is commonly identified with the Greek Hermes, the fleet-footed messenger of the gods. They also paid homage to Vulcan, the Roman god of fire and forge. He's associated with mechanics. So they credited him with helping them to produce the cannon and the steam engine. In Greek mythology, he was known as Hephaestus. World History Encyclopedia says he was probably among the most dreaded of all the gods. Another one making the cut was Ceres, the goddess of agriculture and the harvest in Roman mythology. She was the daughter of Saturn. Here you see her seated on the McCormick Reaper, and joining her is America, personified as a woman in a red liberty cap. So this says Her favor would bring humankind plentiful harvests and fruitful crops, but her wrath brought blight, drought, and famine. Usually depicted as a matron, her symbols included the sickle, shafts of grain, and the cornucopia. Her Greek counterpart is Demeter, one of the 12 Olympian gods. Folks, we were lied to about the founding of this nation. Did you see any Bible passages or anything reminiscent of the Most High in that fresco? That's because the founders honored the gods they were worshiping. The scenes tell us how they got knowledge and who they credited with the success of the nation. They pointed back to their pagan deities, and it's all tied to Roman gods. Whether you like hearing this or not, it's the truth. The founders of this nation made it clear who they were honoring. They never stopped serving their gods. So you can be like Rahab and refuse to go down with the ship. There's a reason the Most High tells us to come out of her. We're looking at a grand delusion here, and we have to obey the command to come out of these pagan religions. The choice is yours. There's a whole lot more that we can point out regarding America's Roman roots, but we'll end it here and continue the discussion next time. But if this message has been a blessing to you, please hit the like and share it. You're also welcome to subscribe if you have not already done so. We normally upload messages on Sunday mornings at 8:30 a.m. Yah willing. Join me next time.